of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I swear to God, if this microphone does that again, I'm actually going to throw it against the wall, and I am not joking, because this is absurd. Like, I don't understand why it decides to work and why it decides not to work sometimes. I apologize for that, but regardless, we're going to go ahead and go into the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, where we go on and we talk a little bit about Trae Young and exactly sort of what's been the talk that he said. Like, he was on his podcast, and we're going to just go ahead and briefly talk about some of the things that he said, some of the things that are sort of circulating around the league now and around based off of what he said. But before I go on into that second segment, I like to remind everybody to please use the link in the description to get your comments recognized. The link is gsmcpodcast.net. Helps the show, makes the show much more interactive, puts your comments directly in front of my screen. But with that out of the way, we can hopefully go ahead and go into this second segment without any interruptions with my microphone, because my microphone just decides to say, oh, I don't want to work anymore, and it's just fantastic, right? So with that out of the way, and with that microphone problem out of the way, let's go ahead and go into what Trae Young actually said on his podcast. So he had a lot to say about NBA defenses, and he also had a lot to say about his future with the Atlanta Hawks. So a couple of quotes that I took out from his podcast were, "I just want to win. If you don't want me, then someone else will." So this is like a response to him being in a bunch of trade rumors with the Atlanta Hawks, and because a lot of fans are expecting him to get traded or maybe rebuild the Atlanta Hawks the Atlanta Hawks roster. And I don't really see him getting traded. I really see Atlanta being able to bring players to the Hawks, to that organization, and to be able to play for that organization and actually give Trae Young the legitimate help that he so desperately needs. And that's sort of been the stipulation with Trae Young. The fact that he's great as a player, but his team just isn't really good enough in order to to make the cut most of the time. He did go all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals at one point, in large part because the 76ers choked because they had Doc Rivers. It's just what happens. But still, they've made it far. But ever since then, they've regressed. They've regressed dramatically. So, ever since then, they lost to the Miami Heat in the first round in embarrassing fashion. Trae Young got absolutely locked up in that series. And then right afterwards, they lost to the Boston Celtics. And here we are now, where it doesn't look like they're going to make much noise in the play-in, given how Trae Young is injured. And we'll see if he's able to return before the playoffs and whatnot. But as of right now, the Hawks, it doesn't really look like the team that they have is enough to compete in the Eastern Conference. And it's sort of how, even with the trade rumors, Trae Young, on his podcast, he said that he still wants to be with Atlanta. So, and he wants to win in Atlanta. So, with that, and he likes being different. He also said on his podcast that the reason why he joined Oklahoma was because Oklahoma, when he was in college, it never won a championship, and he wanted to try and be the first person to win a championship for that college. And it really goes to show he's very different. He really wants to be different than every other star player. He doesn't want to make super teams. He wants to be the first to do something, and you have to just admire a player like that, because the fact that he wants to bring a championship to Atlanta and he really likes Atlanta, it's something that the organization cannot mess up. They cannot sour their relationship with Trae Young whatsoever, because now he's happy with Atlanta. But if the team doesn't win enough, he might be unhappy with Atlanta. Now, I say this because one of the quotes that he said was, "I want to win. If that's in Atlanta, that's where I want to be." So he is not opposed to leaving that organization if the organization isn't winning. And with that in mind, the Atlanta Hawks, they have to sort of do something to help him and help him win, so that way they can keep him happy. They need to start recruiting a bunch of not necessarily stars. They don't really need stars. Like, they do have that second option with DeJounte Murray. I'm not sure if he's going to get traded to get another second option, but he needs good role players. And Trae Young's play style and his playmaking, it is very good, and he can make any player on any team better with his passing and with the way he sets players up on the floor. And not only that, his scoring as well, which it's not really an underlooked part of his game, but a lot of people don't really, they think he's a bit inefficient in terms of scoring. And yes, he can be efficient, but at the same time, he's also very good at running an offense, and he's definitely a point guard that a lot of people would want to play around. I think he's better than Tyrese. Me personally, I think Trae Young is a much better player than Tyrese, strictly off of consistency, because it's every single year that Trae Young is on the Atlanta Hawks and that he's playing, he always averages around 25 points per game and at least 9.5 assists. At least 9 assists he averages. And that is phenomenal, for a point guard to at least average 9 assists every single year, regardless of who your teammates are. That is phenomenal. And some people might argue oh, it's because he has the ball in his hands 24/7. Well, he can run the offense 24/7. Why wouldn't you want to put the ball in his hands? But another quote that he had on his podcast was, "It is easier to score in the NBA than in college or in overseas." And while, yes, this might seem true, and actually no, it's not, it doesn't seem true. It is true, because we see all of these players scoring 50, 60, 70 point games like it's nothing. And a lot of people would look at these games and be like, "Oh my God, the defense is not what it was back in the 80s or back in the 90s when it was tougher." And maybe yes, but that's only part of the story, and that's something that a lot of people like to leave out, because the other part of the defense back then was the fact that there wasn't a lot of spacing back then. So with the lack of spacing in that era, we'll just bring up a player like Michael Jordan, for example, because that's a player that a lot of people have watched. So when Michael Jordan, obviously, back then, there was no such thing as zone defense. You could not play zone defense in the NBA. You were forced to play man. And back when Michael Jordan was playing, and when he was able to do, because we all know Michael Jordan could create a shot over anyone in that league. It really didn't matter who was guarding him. He was going to score. He was going to find a way to score. And with that in mind, it was really easy for him to score. However, the minute he would get by a defender, because there was no spacing and because there was so many people clogging the paint, the minute he would get by his first defender, the other defender that was already in the paint will be there waiting for Michael Jordan as he goes up for a layup, thus making the shot or making the dunk a lot more difficult for him. And once you implement spacing into the NBA, where there's not somebody stuck down there in the paint waiting for you, it just makes the looks so much easier for whoever is having the ball in their hands, because, again, there's nobody else in the paint. You just have to get by one defender, and boom, you score. So, and with how good the offense has evolved in this league, it makes total sense that a lot more players are scoring, because if, with the spacing, if players decide to help and not give a specific ball handler that open layup once he blows by his defender, that means somebody is going to be wide open in the corner. And if somebody's wide open in the corner, that's a wide open three that you're giving up. And with how good the shooting is in this league, that's going to be a lot of points that you're going to give up if you constantly just drop down to the paint every single time. It's why most of the times the wing defender decides to rotate down over to the corner and to prevent that shot. But even when you do that, someone else is going to be open at the hash. And your rotations, they have to be there. And with rotations in mind, I think that makes defense a lot more difficult to play in the NBA now, because everybody is constantly running, scrambling, trying to find a man to prevent that open three from happening, because they can make that open three now. And back then, teams weren't shooting threes that much. They weren't making that many open threes back then. Another aspect of the game that affects the defense is the overall pacing of the other team and their offense. Now, the offense now, compared to what it was in the 90s, is much faster. Back in the 90s, teams would wait the entire 24 seconds on the shot clock to get a good shot. Now, teams, they could go in 6 seconds or less into the offense. If there is an open shot, they are going to take it. And with that in mind, a lot of players, they have to make sure that there isn't an open shot that they give up. And that's a lot of running. That is a lot of moving on the defensive side of the ball. And combined with, for example, we'll bring up a ball handler. If Luka Doncic, a lot of people like to harp on Luka Doncic's defense. A lot of people like to harp on Trae Young's defense. If they don't rotate, or if they're lazy to rotate, it's probably because they're drained from doing everything on the offense. Because these get, the offense now is very isolation heavy. And it takes the breath out of a lot of these players, therefore preventing them from being able to rotate. And this is something that Trae Young even mentioned on his podcast. He said, there's so much space in the NBA, of course it's going to be easier to score. Because, it creates a lot of easier looks, not just for yourself, but for your teammates as well. And if it's a good shooting day for them, it's night-night for whichever team. And that's why the Pacers are so good and so great on the offensive side of the ball, because they move the ball super fast, and the teams on the defense, they're tired because they just played offense and they just tried getting a shot on them, and now they're expected to rotate over to the corner and guard an open three. It's a lot to ask, and it's a lot of running. And it's a lot less running than what a lot of the defenders had to do back in the 90s or in the 80s. So when you take that into account, it makes sense how it's a lot easier to score because of the spacing. And another thing that makes it a lot easier to score is it's common with a lot of fans to complain about this. It's the flopping in a bunch of these NBA games, how Joel Embiid, Trae Young, James Harden, I'm not entirely sure if Luka Doncic does it all that much, LeBron James. All of these players are perfect examples of players that try to bend the NBA rules to their will via flopping. And it allows them to go to the line. Not only does it slow the game down, but it also allows them to score a lot of points at the line because they are very good free throw shooters. And flopping back then, there wasn't as much flopping back then, or the refs wouldn't really call that much flopping. That I can agree with. That is sort of the only thing. That is the only part of the defense in the NBA back then that was really substantially different and actually better, because they would allow a lot of these players to sort of get up on them, and regardless how often they'd flail their body and sell the contact, the ref wouldn't call it. And even though there's some times where hand checking did get called back in the 90s and 80s, even though a lot of old heads are reluctant to agree. Yes, hand checking was called back then. I can pull up several clips of hand checkings being called on Michael Jordan. And with that in mind, it's the fact that these refs are sort of a lot more lenient to these players and flopping, allowing them to go to the line more. It makes sense that they are scoring more. But at the end of the day, when you looked at James Harden's MVP free throw numbers, they fit in right with the rest. And Michael Jordan actually shot more free throws than James Harden in his MVP year. So I can't really, with that in mind, it's a little bit difficult to say that the free throws are definitely the reason why there's so much scoring. It's because of the spacing. And it's because of like how good the offenses are in the NBA now. Like teams are just able to score so much easier now. And with that in mind, it's like, what more can you do on the defensive side of the ball against a team that has really good offense, like how the Pacers move the ball and how fast they move the ball? Like it's a really difficult task. It's a really difficult task, and it's not something that a lot of these players could do. Like, I mean, expecting a player to be able to carry the entire load on the offense and then carry the load on the defense is a lot to ask with how the NBA works now. But that doesn't mean that these players can't impact the defense in some way. Like, a lot of people, like, they might look at this quote, like, and be like, oh my God, Trae Young is part of the problem by not playing defense. He gets a lot of steals. You can't expect a guard his height and his size to be able to get stops on the defense as much. So he does it in his own way, trying to get steals. It's how Allen Iverson played defense. It's how a lot of these great guards played defense, by getting a bunch of steals. And it's not as impactful as on-ball defense. It's still impactful in giving your team more possessions on the offensive side of the ball. But I digress. And with that, we are out of time for the second segment. So go ahead. And so I'm going to go and have a short break and go into the third segment, which is going to be a quick recap of all of these games that happened from last night. So stay tuned after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Testing. All right. Fantastic. Great. So thank you for tuning in to the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank the Lord that my microphone has decided to work for this segment. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and go into our NBA recap. We always do this for the third segment, as you guys know, and if you guys have been paying attention and been tuning into the stream. So I was talking about Dallas losing to the Pacers, so I might as well go ahead and start with that and go ahead and build off of that with the rest of the games that went down. Because Dallas losing to the Pacers, I'm not even going to lie, in my eyes, I see it as an upset. And I personally think this Dallas Mavericks team should be better than this Pacers team. But they did not play better. Despite Luka Doncic getting a 39-point triple-double, he ended the game with 39, 11, and 10. They still couldn't pull out a win against this team, and they still ended up losing by 17 points. That is not ideal if you're the Dallas Mavericks. The fact that Luka Doncic playing 43 minutes, getting almost 40 points and a triple-double, and they still lose, that is very bad. And it's totally understandable why Luka was frustrated while sitting on the bench for this game. Because it's like, it didn't matter what he did. The Pacers constantly had an answer for it because of the lack of defense from Dallas. And not to mention, Kyrie Irving, he did not play particularly well in this game. He shot 8 for 19 from the field and 3 of 9 from 3, ended the game with 23 points. If you're Kyrie Irving, you're expected to score a lot more, especially being the second option for the Dallas Mavericks. I mean, he was one of the players that averaged almost 30 points in the NBA Finals with LeBron James. And with that in mind, the fact that he's not being able to do that in the regular season is a bit concerning. And this shooting, he wasn't the only player that showed up for this team. PJ Washington ended the game with 20 points, as well as 7 rebounds and 3 assists, 7 of 12 from the field. Daniel Gafford also played well, 7 of 7 from the field, but the rest of the team wasn't really that good. Josh Green ended the game 3 of 7 from the field. Tim Hardaway Jr. ended the game 2 of 8 from the field. Jaden Hardy ended the game 0 for 2, and let's go ahead and keep looking at this stack. Maxi Kleber ended the game 0 for 3. Derek Lively II ended the game 0 for 2. Compared to the rest of the Pacers team, there was only one player on the Pacers that did not get double-digit points. One player on the Pacers that did not get double-digit points. Everybody else did. Pascal Siakam ended the game 13 and 13. Tyrese Halliburton ended the game 19 and 11. Miles Turner ended the game with 20 points. Andrew Nembhard, forgive me if I messed up that last name, ended the game with 10 points. And going on to the bench, Benedict Mathurin ended the game with 19 points. Ben Shepherd ended the game with 12. Jalen Smith ended the game with 11, and so on and so forth. Everybody was in double digits except for Aaron Nesmith. Again, forgive me if I botched that last name. And he only played 22 minutes, but he ended with 6 points. So the fact that everybody on this roster was able to get double-digit points is not ideal, and it really shows how bad the defense is for the Dallas Mavericks. And it really also shows how good the offense is for the Indiana Pacers and how they take advantage of lazy defenses. Because with the speed and how they play, a lot of teams are very lazy to rotate to go guard that corner, because it's like they inbound the ball extremely quickly. They don't wait to get in a half-court set. They move. And, it's like the second they inbound the ball, they get it to Tyrese, he throws it down the court, and it's like there's only... The team is forced to play, the team on the defense is forced to play like a 3-on-4, and because there'd be people still trying to get back on defense, and the second they drive the ball to the paint, it leaves someone wide open for a corner 3, and they take advantage of that, and they do this every single time, and I'm very surprised that teams haven't really tried to sort of defend that in a sense, and they sort of just hope to God that the Pacers start missing. It's not a good look, and it's not something that I think is going to work long term, and it's definitely something that a lot of teams are going to change when guarding the Pacers in the playoffs, if they even make the playoffs. Because right now, the Pacers, they stand 8th in the Eastern Conference. I actually think that they'll probably make it out of the play-in, but depending on who they play in the play-in, we'll see just the results of that game. But let's move on with some of the other games that went down. Before I go into the important games, we're going to talk about my Brooklyn Nets. They finally win a game. After so long, they finally win a game. They beat the Sixers with them being shorthanded without Joel Embiid. A win is a win is a win. And I'm going to take what I can get as a Nets fan with these wins. The scoring for the Nets was a lot more spread than it usually was. Dorian Finney-Smith ended the game with 20 points. Dennis Schroeder also ended the game with 20 points. Lonnie Walker ended the game with 19. Mikal Bridges, he plays every single game. You know he was going to be on this box score. He ended the game with 15 points. And he really hasn't been that player that the Brooklyn Nets expected. He has not made that leap to being the man of the team. And it looked like he was going to be the man of the team, but so far it's not the case. Nicholas Claxton ended the game with 17 points, 6 of 8 from the field, and everyone played relatively well in this game, shooting the ball, and it was enough to win the game in the end. Thankfully, they did not have Joel Embiid. If they had Joel Embiid, I would be there's no surprise that the Sixers would beat us, but so far there was also no Tyrese Maxey in this game, and now I'm sort of thank the Lord that we were able to win this game. But the fact that this game was close is very, very concerning. Buddy Hield, he only ended the game with 13 points and 3 of 9 from the field. I thought this would be a good pickup for the Sixers, but so far it's not. It hasn't really looked like he's been doing enough for this team. Kelly Oubre ended the game with 30 points. I don't know why the Nets let Kelly Oubre end the game with 30 points. Tobias Harris ended the game with 18 points. Cameron Payne ended with 15 points. Kyle Lowry ended the game with 14 points. Now, this Sixers team, they might drop all the way down to they already dropped down to the play-in. Right now, they're 7th in the Eastern Conference. I wouldn't be surprised if they go all the way down to like 10th in the Eastern Conference, or even out of the playoffs entirely if Joel Embiid doesn't return very, very soon. So that's something that the Sixers have to worry about going into the future. Let's see what else. Now let's go on to like the big games and the important games. There were 2 major upsets that happened last night. One of them being the Boston Celtics. They ended up losing to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull up the box scores real quick. Just give me 1 second. In the fourth quarter, with 9 minutes left to go, the Boston Celtics were up 93-71. Then the final score was 105-104 in favor of the Cavs. That is a huge upset if you're the Boston Celtics. Giving up a 22-point lead in the fourth quarter is unacceptable for the number 1 team in the NBA. And it is the largest fourth quarter comeback of the season to end the Celtics win streak. Now, as the Celtics, you might look at this game and be like, okay, I mean, like it was just one loss. It's not really going to affect us going into the playoffs, but that is concerning. The fact that they blew that game. It is very, very concerning because again, they were up by 20 points. Normally, in the fourth quarter, when they are up by 20 points, they close that game out instantly. They always close that game out with their offense, and the game ends up being an even bigger blowout than what it usually is. That's sort of what's been expected with the Boston Celtics this season. And the fact that they sort of allowed them to come back is a little bit concerning, especially when they're sort of short-handed coming off of the bench. They only had 4 people coming off of the bench outside of the rotation. And the scoring for the Cavs wasn't really there. The final score was 105-104. It wasn't a high-scoring game. It was really down to defense. And the fact that they also didn't have Donovan Mitchell in this game, which is even more concerning for the Boston Celtics. Because the Boston Celtics, they weren't shorthanded whatsoever. They played absolutely everybody. And the fact that they lost without the Cavs' best player is very, very concerning. And it honestly shows just how good the Cavs are as a team. And Jarrett Allen, he ended the game with 21 and 12. Darius Garland ended the game with 16 and 11. Isaac Okoro ended the game with 16 points. And Dean Wade, coming off of the bench, ended the game with 23 and 8. Now, the shooting for the Cavs, it was really good. They ended up hitting 23-pointers, shooting 47% from 3 as a team, and that's sort of what separated them with between the Boston Celtics, because the Celtics only shot 39% from 3. So that is a 12% difference in 3-point shooting. On a few more shots, but still that 12% difference makes a lot in this league. And with that in mind, the Celtics, they did not really play that well. Jaylen Brown didn't play that well. 8 for 20 from the field with 21 points. Jason Tatum 8 for 21 from the field with 26 points. Kristaps was 9 of 18 from the field with 24 points, and Drew Holiday only ended the game with 12 points, 5 of 9 from the field. Derek White, who I said in previous podcasts was developing into a star, ended the game 1 of 5 from the field with 3 points. So it wasn't his night on the offensive side of the ball. Maybe if he actually produced on the offense, we would be looking at this game completely different. Another upset that happened was the Suns beating the Denver Nuggets by 10 points without Devin Booker. Now, obviously, the Nuggets, they weren't shorthanded in this game whatsoever, and they ended up losing. And it's very surprising that they ended up losing to the Suns. I mean, Kevin Durant, he has a very good track record when going up against Nikola Jokic. So He ended the game with 35 points, played 44 minutes. Grayson Allen ended the game with 28 points, and Bradley Beal ended the game with 16 points. So it was really all Kevin Durant, even though like he actually shot very poorly from the field. 14 of 34 from the field and getting 35 points. He only ended the game with one more point than shot attempts. Not ideal for Kevin Durant, but obviously, and not very efficient, something that's a little bit surprising for Kevin Durant to really shoot inefficiently, but he ended up getting the win in the end. And on the Denver Nuggets side, Jokic ended the game with 25 and 16, which is honestly probably the biggest reason why they lost, because Jokic didn't end the game with a triple-double. He has a very good track record when he ends the game with a triple-double, and it really shows like the value behind his triple-doubles. Like his triple-doubles actively lead to wins, unlike some people. And Jamal Murray ended the game with 28 points and 9 assists. Michael Porter Jr. ended the game with 20 points. And while the Nuggets, they were a little bit shorthanded, like they had to make Jokic and Murray play 40-plus minutes, along with Michael Porter Jr. So with that in mind, like it makes sense how they sort of shot inefficiently. Jokic went 8 for 18 from the field. We rarely see him shoot that inefficiently. Jamal Murray, 12 for 25. Michael Porter Jr., also 8 for 18 from the field. So, and Aaron Gordon ended the game with 7 points and was 3 of 10 from the field. So that obviously did not help anything whatsoever, the fact that they weren't shooting as efficiently as they normally do. I think this is just a bump in the road for the Denver Nuggets. I really think they are the favorites to make the Western Conference Finals again, despite this loss. And one more game I'd like to talk about before we do run out of time is the Spurs going up against the Rockets. The Rockets ended up winning 114 to 101. And the reason why I bring this game up is because Alperen Sengun completely outplayed Victor Wembanyama in this game. He ended the game with 45 points and 16 rebounds and 5 steals. That is insane. And a lot of people like dubbed this guy as like the next Jokic, and a little bit funny for like the Dillon Brooks haters. Dillon Brooks ended the game with 0 points and was 0 for 3 from the field. But really, could you blame him? Because Sengun was going off on Victor Wembanyama this game. And his play style, like, yes, it reminds me of Jokic. Like, obviously, he's not as good of a passer as Jokic, even though he can be as good of a passer as Jokic. But his defense this game on Victor Wembanyama was phenomenal. Victor Wembanyama only had 10 points and 11 rebounds. Very uncharacteristic from him, even though he only took 10 shots as a player. And he sort of allowed, like, his team to sort of do what his team needed to do. It didn't work in the end of the day. But I just wanted to bring this game up just to talk about Sengun and how good of a player he was, and how like this Rockets team, while it's not where it like it's not a while they're not like the best team, they're a mediocre team. They could be very special if they build around Sengun and his style of play. If they build around this guy and not Jalen Green, they will go far in the future. Like, this guy is the next face. And Jabari Smith. Like, don't build around those players. Build around Sengun. If you build around Sengun, you're going to find success in your future. And that's sort of, like, all I wanted to touch on because, like, again, Jabari Smith and Jalen Green, I'm not a really big fan of either of those players because Jalen Green, in my eyes, is just a shot chucker. I mean, he ended the game 11 of 23 from the field and 23 points overall, 1 for 10 from 3. He just chucks up the ball, and I really do not like his play style. It's all about him, and highlights. It's similar to like how I feel about Jordan Poole. I am not a big fan of Jalen Green. You do not build around him. Build around Sengun. And we're out of time for this third segment, so I'm going to go ahead and speed rally some of these games. The Knicks, they recently lost to the Hawks 116 to 100. Makes sense. The Knicks, they don't really have all of their players in the starting lineup, all the players that they need. Brunson, he was out this game, so it definitely makes sense that this team was missing something on the offensive side of the ball. They really need Brunson. Not going to talk much about that game because we're running out of time. The Magic ended the game 101 to 89 against Charlotte. And obviously, like the Magic, they've been going off. They've been on a roll so far. This like after this All-Star break. Right now, they are 4th in the Eastern Conference, and they really look to be like a really good team. And another team that is looking really good right now is the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat, they've hold on just one second while the box scores load up. They won the game 118-110 against the Detroit Pistons. Obviously, like, this is the Pistons. Like, we expected the Miami Heat to beat the Pistons because the Pistons are that bad. So, not really much to really talk about this game other than, like, a lot of people are saying that Jimmy Butler is playoff Jimmy is back and he's going to return for the playoffs. I think playoff Jimmy is a myth. Personally, I think he's a myth. He only plays well in the first round, at least given last year. He only played well in the first round, and he kept regressing every single time in the postseason. So, but I digress about that. And the Pelicans, they also played last night. They beat the Toronto Raptors, who are also shorthanded without having Scotty Barnes, if this box score could actually load. 139-98. They scored 42 points in the first quarter. So it was really just wraps right after that. But that's all for this third segment. That was all of the games that ended up going down. So now I'm going to go into the fourth segment, which is going to talk about Victor Wembanyama. And we already talked about him being clear-cut Rookie of the Year. Now we're going to talk about if he deserves to be the Defensive Player of the Year, because Draymond Green had something to say about that on his podcast. So I will be right back after this short break to talk about that as well. And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to talk about Victor Wembanyama yet again. He's one of my favorite players to watch just because of how broken he is and just how overpowered he is as a player. I mean, he is a 7'4" point guard who can shoot the ball and play great defense and do everything on the court. And he's really fun to watch because it's if you play 2K, it's like looking at a my player that you generated that's just ridiculously overpowered. And he's a fan favorite in the NBA, and he's expected to do great things. Pardon me. He's expected to do great things. He is the next man up in this league. But I already talked about how he is clear-cut Rookie of the Year. There is absolutely no contest on who's going to win Rookie of the Year. It is going to be Victor, whether Chet fans like it or not. He is by far, right now the question really is if he's going to win Rookie of the Year unanimously, in my opinion, because he is clear-cut the Rookie of the Year. But he's also in talks for being the Defensive Player of the Year as well. And as a rookie, that is phenomenal. The fact that he's already in talks of being the best defender in the NBA as a rookie is astonishing. However, not many people really agree with that, despite Victor Wembanyama leading the NBA in blocks per game with, I believe it was 3.3 the last time I checked. So I'm just going to go ahead. One of those players that doesn't agree or like doesn't think that Victor is going to win Defensive Player of the Year is Draymond Green. Now, Draymond Green, he's won the Defensive Player of the Year award himself. So he definitely knows like what it takes to be a Defensive Player of the Year. So we're going to go ahead and deep dive exactly what he said and whether or not I agree with it or whether I don't agree with it. So the quote here is, he'll have these numbers and he'll have opportunities to win Defensive Player of the Year. I personally don't think that it's this year. Even if Rudy Gobert wasn't having the year that he's having and their team wasn't having the season that they're having, I still don't think you can give that award to somebody who's on the 24th best defense in the league. Now, I understand where Draymond Green is coming from. And like Defensive Player of the Year, it's sort of like most valuable defender, like for a team. So like if your defense leads to a bunch of wins, then that makes you the Defensive Player of the Year. And like it makes sense because it's like it shows just how impactful that center really is on the defense. And like Rudy Gobert, he's won Defensive Player of the Year multiple times. And the reason why like he won it was because the Utah Jazz were such a good defensive team when he was under center. And it makes sense when because again, like the Spurs defense as a whole, it isn't that great. Like again, 24th ranked defense and one of the worst teams in the Western Conference. So it makes sense how Draymond Green's mind would go to that, because when he won Defensive Player of the Year, the Golden State Warriors were actively winning games. And like he got that award because they were winning games. So it made sense. And I'm just looking at this article real quick. In 56 games this season, she's averaged 20 points, 10 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.3 steals, and leading with 3.4 blocks. So the blocks actually went up the last time I checked. And he leads the rookies in every single category aside from assists. That counts for the steals, steals averaged, total steals and steals averaged, along with total blocks and blocks averaged. So, along with leading the NBA in blocks per game and total blocks, he's also 12th in rebounds per game and 14th in steals per game, 10th in defensive win shares, and 3rd in defensive rating. Like as an individual player, he's ranked 3rd in defensive rating. And as a rookie, that is phenomenal. Like, it's ridiculously impressive how, his defense is, immediately going into the league is just straps. It's just straight lockdown defense from him. And it's very, very impressive. But when comparing it to, the other competition with Rudy Gobert is averaging 12 rebounds and 2.1 blocks per game. But he also leads the NBA in defensive win shares and defensive rating. And the Timberwolves are 43-19 and have the NBA's best defense, allowing just 106.5 points per game, which is nearly 3 points per game better than any other team. So, with that in mind, and with what Draymond Green said, Rudy Gobert, he brings the value to this defensive team. It seems that every single team that Rudy Gobert has been on has been number one on the defensive side of the ball. And it's obviously it's incredibly valuable for a team. So it's not a question of who is the better defender, it's whose defense brings value to the team. And when you look at it that way, it definitely seems like Rudy Gobert will be the favorite to win Defensive Player of the Year. However, looking at it on the other perspective, it's a team rating. Being the number one ranked team on the defensive side of the ball, despite the fact that you are the best defender on the team, it's still like a team accomplishment, and the rest of the team has to be good on the defensive side of the ball in order to be like the number one defensive team in the NBA. And like when you think about it, like Rudy Gobert, he can only do so much defending in the paint, and he has really like no outside control on if let's say some of the guards or some of the forwards decide to rotate or decide to leave their man open. He has no control over that. Similar to Victor Wembanyama, how he has no control over what his teammates do on the defensive side of the ball. He can only do so much, and he's trying to impact the defense as best as he can, getting the blocks and getting these steals, but he can only do so much because he can't guard all 5 players on the court. So when you look at it that way, it also like it doesn't really make much sense because Defensive Player of the Year is an individual accolade. So I'm sort of stuck like as to who I think is going to be the Defensive Player of the Year, because I understand Draymond's point of view, but I also understand like where Victor Wembanyama is coming from with this team, because again, he can't control like what his team does on the defense. He can only impact it so much. And I agree with Draymond and how it's going to like sort of impact it's going to impact like the voters and ultimately making a decision, because Rudy Gobert, when he was on the Jazz, number 1 defensive team. Now he's on the Timberwolves, number 1 defensive team. It's like it's a pattern, and it's a constant pattern with Rudy Gobert. Every single team that he's been on is the best defensive team. That is no coincidence. And when you put it that way, it sort of seems like Rudy Gobert is without a doubt the Defensive Player of the Year. And it's really difficult to tell. Like, let me know what you guys think about it in the comments, because right now I'm really like I'm actually really stumped with who I think is supposed to be the Defensive Player of the Year. Do I look at it from an individual standpoint, or do I look at it from team success like as a whole, and like the overall like defensive prowess that the team has? Like, it's really confusing, because like again, it's not just Rudy Gobert that's involved in like the defensive strategy every single time. It's also like the coaching and the fact that like the players that he plays with, like Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards is a really good defender for the guard, and he's not lazy on the defensive side of the ball. So that also helps the Timberwolves and their defensive rating. The fact that Ant is a really good perimeter defender, along with all the other players that they have. And when I think about that, it sort of like makes me want to favor Victor a little bit more, because his team is much more incompetent than Rudy Gobert's teams, and have been in like the previous years. The Jazz, they weren't an incompetent team when Rudy Gobert was on there, and the Timberwolves, they aren't an incompetent team when he's on there. So, and not to mention, they also play Cat at the 4, so that also adds a lot more length and a lot more presence in the paint. And it, again, like it does affect rotations, but it really hasn't seemed to affect the rotations that much, because again, they are the number 1 defensive team in the NBA. But it's the fact that like Victor Wembanyama has incompetent teammates that I really don't feel like that should hinder him in the voting, given how like he's leading the NBA in blocks. Like 3.4 blocks per game as a rookie is not something to like just shrug off. Like if a center was to average 3 blocks in a game, it's very rare now in this league, given how like 3-point heavy the NBA has become, and the fact that like a lot of people don't really go up in the paint as much as they did back then. That's why a lot of those players back then were able to average like 4 blocks per game or like 3.9 blocks per game. There was one season, I forgot exactly what season it was, but it was around in the 90s with Dikembe Mutombo. There were 4 players that averaged at least 3.8 blocks. And, like, we don't really see that often. Like, we don't really see centers average 3 blocks per game as often as we used to. And when it does happen, it's sort of like, I feel like it should be brought to everybody's attention by winning the Defensive Player of the Year. And he shouldn't be hindered just because of his own teammates' incompetence. but it might just be like my bias towards Victor. Like I'm a really big fan of Victor, as I mentioned before on at the beginning of this podcast. But again, we'll just have to see as the year progresses. Right now, it really seems like those two are sort of like neck and neck in terms of Defensive Player of the Year. And they might be neck and neck in terms of the media just because of like the media's overall opinion on Rudy Gobert. Not everybody is a fan of Rudy Gobert, seeing as how he shut the entire league down by spreading COVID-19. And the fact that his on-ball defense is really, really bad. And that's another thing that I completely forgot to talk about. We're running out of time, but I completely forgot about like Rudy Gobert's on-ball defense compared to Victor Wembanyama, who's also averaging a lot of steals. And Victor Wembanyama is a lot quicker on his feet, and he can also block defenders at the three-point line. And I really think that's what separates him from a lot of great defenders, being able to block that three-point shot with his length. Like, there's really nothing that like a shooter can do when Victor Wembanyama jumps and like goes up for that block, because it's going to be a block almost every time at the three-point line. And that's what separates his defense from Rudy Gobert, in my opinion. The fact that he's dominant in the paint on defense, and he can also like go out there and guard those guards because he is quick on his feet. He's a lot quicker on his feet than Rudy Gobert. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. But with that, we are out of time. And that is the end of the show segment, and that is the end of the show. Thank you guys for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And before I end this segment, I'd like to remind everybody to please use the link in the description or the link that is displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. It is gsmcpodcast.net. Puts your donations and comments right in front of my screen. Helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. So once again, the link is gsmcpodcast.net. And that is the end of the show for everybody. Now, thank you once again for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson. And as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit.